Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast and thank you for tuning in to this solo episode, which is going to be your comprehensive guide on how to not rebound after dieting your ass off. Here's where you're at right now if you're listening to this episode. You've dieted successfully. You understand the concept of calorie balance and that you're supposed to go back to maintenance calories when you're finished with your fat loss phase. But at the same time, right now, being in a deficit is all you know how to do successfully. And you are scared that after all this work, you're going to regain unwanted weight and body fat. You're thinking something like, how can I increase my calories without regaining weight? Can I even do that? Am I going to regain weight immediately? It's shocking to me that not many coaches talk about this critical stage of a fat loss phase that you're currently in, which I call the post-diet transition. It's during this 2 to 4 week period that a lot of people fail to set themselves up for maintaining the results that they've worked so hard for, because the end of a fat loss diet is a rocky time for your self-control. You've busted your ass for only your coach knows how long. You've planned and you've tracked your food meticulously. You've been doing your steps, your cardio, and your training diligently. You've said no to Pringles and Ben & Jerry's more often than you'd like to. And while that is hard, ironically, the biggest challenge starts now. You knuckled down and navigated the hardships of a calorie deficit because you had a goal. You had a strong why that made it easier to stop yourself from inhaling M&Ms and Reese's cups. Well, at least most of the time. We all have our wobbles. But without this goal and with the extra flexibility that comes with increasing your calorie budget to maintenance calories, it can be all too easy to slowly but surely let the missteps compound. I'll just have one more becomes a whole pack of Oreos. Oh, I forgot to track that spoonful of peanut butter becomes hundreds of calories that you're not accounting for or that you're eyeballing instead of weighing properly on the scale. So you're underestimating them. One meal won't make a difference becomes a takeaway every time you can't be bothered to cook. And look, I'm not blaming you. For one, you've been dieting for months, and that is fucking hard. Of course, you're hungry. It is a physiological response to a prolonged fat loss phase, and you want to eat the delicious food that you chose not to have for the sake of your goal. Are you kidding me? After my photo shoot prep ended back in August 2022, I was the leanest I've ever been. I had been dieting for 6 months and I just wanted to eat bread and pizza all day, every day, instead of the egg whites and the 0% fat yogurt that had carried me through those 6 months of dieting on 14 to 1500 calories. Secondly, most coaches will be on your ass as you lose body fat. But what about afterwards, when you need them the most in this crucial post-diet transition? Well, they'll get your impressive before and after pictures to slap on their Instagram accounts, they'll pat you on the back, and then they'll fob you off, saying, well done, let's bump your calories back to maintenance and off you fuck. as if transitioning out of a diet successfully was as simple as just increasing your calories, especially if you've never done it before or if you tried it in the past and you weren't very successful. Last but not least, the sneaky thing about weight regain is that it doesn't just happen overnight. If you just woke up tomorrow 10 pounds heavier, you would notice. And we wouldn't live in a Western society with such high rates of overweight and obesity. No, weight regain happens slowly over a number of months and years until one day you look in the mirror and you tell yourself, "Ah, I've let myself go again." No wonder most people regain all the weight that they lose and then some every time they diet, because it is fucking hard and they don't get the right support, especially in this post diet transition. For these reasons, in the 2 to 4 weeks after your diet is over, you need a smarter plan than just go back to maintenance calories in order to pave the way to your next goal successfully. So, if this resonates with you, this podcast episode will be your comprehensive guide to navigating this transition from fat loss into fat loss maintenance successfully. I have divided the guide into steps, and I then further divided the steps into two different categories. This is how anal I am, dear listeners. I'm going to give you mindset related steps, and then I'm going to give you practical steps to follow. Let's start with the mindset related steps. Step number one is to frame the end of the diet effectively. Whether consciously or not, it's tempting to think that after all the effort that you put into this fat loss phase, you deserve to treat yourself to certain foods. But what you truly deserve is to live in the lean and healthy body that you've spent so long building. It's not that you cannot have any of these tasty foods, but you don't want to frame them as a reward. The real reward is that you get to live in this physique and continue to work on the habits required to maintain it or to build more muscle if that's your jam. Habits that not only make your body look good, they make you feel good in that body too. What you don't deserve is to go back to the eating impulses that led you to carrying excess fat, feeling uncomfortable in your body, sluggish, and less fit than you are now. Step number two is to set a new goal and make it an approach goal. First off, what do I mean by approach goal? Based on human motivation theory, two common types of goal include number one, avoidance goals, which are based on avoiding an undesired outcome, and number two, approach goals, which are based on moving towards a desirable outcome. After a fat loss phase, many people's go to goal is I don't want to regain weight, which is an avoidance goal. You are setting the goal of avoiding weight regain. And this is completely understandable. In fact, I personally felt this so strongly that for years in my adolescence and in my early 20s, I was stuck with disordered eating habits and with the impulse to overexercise because I was absolutely petrified of regaining even a single ounce of all the weight that I had lost between 14 and 15 years of age. After coaching hundreds of people and after several successful and much healthier diets that I went through myself, I recommend focusing on approach goals instead. For one, living in fear of an increase in scale weight will not help you nurture a productive relationship with food and with your body. Second, worrying so much about the impact that eating could have on your weight and physique is likely to make you take a restrictive approach to food. And if you feel restricted, you're more likely to experience cravings and give in to overeating, and even, in extreme cases, develop binge eating disorder or binge eating disordered tendencies. Third, obsessing over fat regain is just not fun. Take it from someone who turned it into a full time job until I was 22. You don't want nagging thoughts of fat regain, food restriction, and cravings to take up all of the mental headspace that you could be devoting to much more rewarding pursuits. So set an approach goal that will not tempt you into restricting food and concerning yourself with the scale too much. As I said earlier, the reason why it can be so easy to ruin your post diet transition is that you no longer have an important goal to drive you. If maintaining your fat loss is motivating enough for you, which it could be for some people, then that's great. But for many people, this isn't a particularly exciting goal. It may feel too vague, or it may feel like you're stagnating. So now that the diet is over, you want a goal that feels just as valuable as exciting as fat loss used to feel. So I'm going to give you some examples. An exciting goal for you could be learning to maintain your weight successfully for a few weeks, practicing habits that lead to weight maintenance before you decide that it's time to enter a muscle building phase in a surplus or a bulking phase. Or it could be a performance related goal, like a stronger deadlift or your first pull up. Or it could be learning how to transition away from tracking calories and macros, which was really helpful as you were losing body fat. But now that you don't want to lose it anymore, you want to build habits that enable you to maintain these results without MyFitnessPal. It doesn't really matter what it is, and it depends on you, as long as it drives you to stay on top of your nutrition even now that the diet is over. Now let's talk about the practical steps, and let's start by setting some expectations around what it looks like to increase your calories from a deficit to maintenance, because that's going to help you understand step number one. When you increase calories to maintenance calories, in the first 1 or 2 weeks, you need to expect scale weight gain. Importantly, this is not fat regain. You are gaining weight on the scale because with an increase in calories, people typically increase their carbohydrates, which get stored in your muscle, liver, and other areas of the body, along with about 3 to 4 grams of water per gram of carbohydrates, which gets stored in a form called glycogen. So if you store 100 grams of glycogen, you're also going to store 3 to 400 grams of water. And that's about a total of 4 to 500 grams, which is almost a pound of pure glycogen and water, not fat. In addition to that, you're also going to have more food in your gut if you are increasing your portions, which even if you weigh in fasted, which is my recommendation, you may still have some of it from the night before if you didn't feel the need to go for a number two after having dinner last night. You may even get a little bit more training related inflammation, which is absolutely normal. I don't want you to worry about the word inflammation, but you might experience a bit more of that, which comes with an increase in water retention, which causes scale weight gain, because after ending a diet and having more calories, you're going to find that you can train a lot harder because you have a lot more energy. I'm telling you all this because it is inevitable and it can mess with your head even if you are prepared for it. Because for so long you've been looking at your scale weight and you've been aiming for it to go down. So, of course, in this 2 to 4 week post diet transition, your mind is primed to freak out if the scale goes up. But I also want you to understand that it is inevitable so that it is easier to make your peace with it and also to choose between the two options that I'm going to give you as I discuss step one, which comes down to having to make a choice. Do you go straight back to maintenance calories the day after you finish the diet, or do you reverse diet your way up there? Let's cover what a reverse diet is. You may be familiar with the term, but maybe you don't know what it involves. A reverse diet involves, instead of straight up going back to your estimated maintenance calories, increasing calories more gradually, typically by 100 every week or a few days, until you reach that estimated maintenance calories. So, throughout this process, you're still in a deficit. It just gets smaller and smaller over time until you get to your estimated maintenance calories. On the other hand, returning to the estimated maintenance calories the day after you finish a fat loss diet would involve making the estimation first and foremost. And the way that I recommend doing it and the way I do it for my clients is I take the last 4 weeks of fat loss. I look at the weekly rate of body weight loss and I estimate your maintenance calories based on those last 4 weeks because they are the closest in time to your physique right now. So they're going to be the most accurate piece of data relative to your current physique. Of course, there are some confounding factors for some people. For example, if you're AFAB and you have a menstrual cycle, if you experience symptoms around your premenstrual phase, such as an increase in your scale weight, you'll know to take out that particular week because it wouldn't be representative of your actual body weight over time. So you might use 3 weeks or you might use 6 weeks encompassing two different cycles. So there are confounding factors that I work through for my own clients. In any case, these are the two options, and you need to choose which one you want to go with. So I'm going to give you the tools to make that decision by explaining the pros and cons of both. From a physiological perspective, in my view, there isn't really a benefit to going back to maintenance or reverse dieting and spending a little bit longer in a smaller and smaller deficit. Meaning, you're not going to be more or less likely to maintain long term fat loss because you reverse dieted versus went straight back to maintenance. But there are some psychological aspects to think about. Returning to maintenance calories straight away is more likely to relieve your diet fatigue faster. And I'm not going to talk about diet fatigue in too much depth because I have a lot of episodes on that topic. So just type diet fatigue into the search bar when you're looking at my podcast as a whole on whatever app you're using, and all of the episodes where I cover this will come up. In any case, maintenance calories are more likely to relieve diet fatigue faster because we accumulate diet fatigue being in a deficit. And since reverse dieting is still a deficit, though a smaller one, it's less likely to help you get out of this diet fatigue state as quickly as maintenance. However, at maintenance calories, you're going to see that weight increase on the scale that I mentioned earlier pretty much right away, which can also fuck with your heads. And also, it is the bigger calorie budget between a deficit and a reverse diet and maintenance. So, if you worry that having that much flexibility right away is going to make you overeat, then potentially you would want to look into a reverse diet. With a reverse diet, as I said, one of the cons is that you're going to relieve diet fatigue more slowly because you're still in a bit of a deficit for a few weeks. However, the pros are that you get a bit leaner until the deficit is no longer there, and that your scale weight doesn't spike up as quickly. And also, as I said just now, if you do worry that having too much flexibility too quickly with your calories could lead to you overdoing the calories and overshooting them, then potentially giving yourself more time to work up to the extra flexibility could be a better choice for you. Anyway, you've got to pick your poison depending on these factors. But also, I do want to mention on the topic of being afraid of scale weight changes, if you are that concerned, make sure that you have a coach or that you hire a coach who helps you challenge these concerns because, dear listeners, you are too smart to live in fear of an inanimate object with some numbers on it, because that's all a scale is at the end of the day. Anyway, when you've made your choice, step number 2 is do not change your diet just yet. We've established that at the end of a fat loss diet, you might want to eat an arm and a leg, especially if they're made of Lindt chocolate. Or is that just me? This is because As you diet for longer and lose more and more body fat, you also start thinking more and more about your next meal, how to make your diet tastier, and all the delicious food that you will get to have after this fat loss phase is over. In the fitness community, we call this combination of thoughts food focus. And it's a common side effect of being in a prolonged deficit and of losing a significant amount of weight and body fat. One of the goals of the transition back to maintenance, so this post diet phase, is to reduce food focus over time. But this is not going to happen overnight, especially if you dieted for a very long time and or you've gotten very, very lean. However, you can get there faster by using the extra calories that you get at maintenance calories or even in a reverse dieting scenario in order to make the current portions of your fat loss friendly meals that you've eaten throughout this fat loss phase a little bit bigger, especially at the time of day when you tend to experience the greatest hunger spikes or the greatest energy dips. So, in theory, although you could fit Mars bars and Burger King into your maintenance calories, day one after the diet is over may not be the best time to do it. First, you need to recover a little from the effects that prolonged dieting tends to have on your hormones and on your mental bandwidth. So I've covered food focus and I've hinted earlier at the fact that throughout a diet there are physiological changes that are not under your control that are common response to a prolonged calorie deficit and to a significant loss of body fat and weight. And one of these changes is that your appetite hormones go a little out of whack. Ghrelin, one of the primary hunger hormones, increases, and leptin, one of the primary satiety hormones, tends to go down. So, this change in your hunger and satiety hormones, along with the gradual accumulation of diet fatigue and food focus, is a perfect storm for turning one Kit Kat into 65. That's why I recommend, in this initial transition out of a deficit, to stick to your fat loss friendly meals and simply increase the portion size. Because having larger meals will make you feel psychologically satisfied. Because who doesn't like a big plate full of food after months on so called poverty calories? It's my joke for when people are on their lowest calorie budget in a fat loss phase. It's not just going to make you feel psychologically satisfied, it's also going to keep you physiologically full, which means that you'll be less likely to give in to this physiological and psychological response to prolonged dieting and extensive fat loss, and therefore end up overeating against your best judgment. Step number three is to reintroduce pre diet foods, so to speak, gradually. And what I mean by pre diet foods is foods that most people choose to have less of or not at all during a fat loss phase because they are highly palatable, so it's hard to stop eating them, and they're also higher in calories. So think about cookies, cake, chocolate, and the like. And therefore, they make it harder not only not to overeat, but also to fit enough highly nutritious food to hit your macros while you're in a small calorie budget like a fat loss phase would entail. As I said, in theory, you have the calories for them, but we need to be strategic about choosing the appropriate time for you to reintroduce them. Because if you reintroduce them too early, not only would you be potentially more likely to overeat them, but because they are higher in calories, now you'll have to eat a smaller serving of the specific food that is higher in calories to make it fit into your calorie budget. But also, in some cases, you will even have to reduce the size of your other meals and snacks in order to fit that specific food into your calorie budget for the day. And this could make you feel less physically satisfied and also keep your hunger levels a little too high so that you're not really relieving that diet fatigue that we've talked about, and you're not really helping your hunger and fullness hormones go back to normal. At the same time, avoiding absolutely all of these highly palatable foods for too long can also increase food focus, cravings, and diet fatigue in some people. And that's why there is no real one size fits all approach to success here, and your mileage may vary. So, what I'm going to do is I am going to give you some questions to ask yourself to decide which foods to reintroduce and when to do so. Question A: how frequently have you had that specific food throughout the fat loss phase you've just been through? For instance, if you've had a square of chocolate every day while you were in a deficit, and you just want to go to two at maintenance instead of the one, you're less likely to turn those two squares into a whole family sized bar than you would be if you hadn't eaten chocolate in 6 months. Question B: how likely are you to overeat that specific food? When you're reintroducing high calorie foods, I would start with those that you know you have more control over and wait until you're more recovered from diet fatigue before you mindfully reintroduce the ones that you're less sure you have control over. For instance, if you feel like eating a slice of cake is a big deal, TM in all caps, that you look forward to more than you do the next season of your all time favorite show, then you may want to reintroduce a different food that you feel less dramatic about on day one after the diet ends, and then wait to have the cake when you're a little bit less diet fatigued and it doesn't seem like as much of a big deal. Ultimately, food will always be there, so you're not swearing off of it forever, but just until you're in the right mental headspace to feel fully in control of it rather than under the control of food. Question C: what's going to make you feel less food focused and diet fatigued and like you're victim of cravings? For instance, after my photo shoot diet in 2022, as I said, I was at my all time leanest and hungriest. And for that reason, although I would have loved to have a ton more pizza, which is my favorite highly palatable food, what I chose to do was to have the same fat loss friendly, lower calorie, higher volume meals that I had had for most of my diet, but I had larger portions of them because since I was that lean and I was that diet fatigued, it was an extreme case in which I thought that a gradual and mindful reintroduction of highly palatable food was in order. In that particular situation, having to budget calories for a donut right after I stopped dieting would have made me feel far more deprived than increasing my portions and waiting a little longer for the donuts. As a different example, I just ran a 9 week summer cut, and at the end of it, I wasn't as lean and I wasn't as diet fatigued. So I didn't mind having slightly smaller meals, and when I went on a cruise the week after the diet was over, I wanted to experience certain sweets and desserts that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to eat when I got back to the UK. So I introduced them pretty much right away. I didn't have my usual high volume meals during the cruise and said no to some delicious Norwegian, what was it, cinnamon bun that I had. I had the cinnamon bun, but I was also in a very different position compared to at the end of the photo shoot. Question D, which is the final one. How confident are you in your post diet skills? Because if you're a newbie to this process of transitioning back to maintenance calories and long term fat loss maintenance, err on the side of caution. After all, as I said, food will always be there, and this transition is meant to be temporary. After a few weeks at maintenance calories, so if you're reverse dieting, when you've achieved maintenance calories and you're no longer in a deficit, if you approach this transition the right way, your diet fatigue should ease, and you can reintroduce more and more foods of all kinds as desired while still feeling relaxed and in control, and not like any of them is a big deal TM in all caps. Step number 4. In most cases, but not all cases, you want to stay as active as you were during the diet. When first increasing your calories to maintenance, you want to keep all the other variables involved in the calorie balance equation the same. And this includes steps, resistance training, and cardio, because they all contribute to your energy expenditure. So if you're changing the energy intake side of the equation by increasing calories, ideally you would keep the other side of the equation the same. So the first reason is that if you estimated your maintenance calories based on the last 4 weeks of dieting, as I suggested earlier, then this estimation is based on the amount of physical activity that you've been doing for these past 4 weeks. So if you start doing less, the estimation is no longer as accurate. And we cannot guarantee that you won't potentially put yourself in an accidental surplus. But there are also other reasons. And one of them is obvious: movement is good for you. Duh. Another one is that by doing less activity, you're going to open up more time to think about food at a time when you're already primed to be thinking about food a lot because of diet fatigue and food focus, as I mentioned. And if you've been keeping up with my content long enough, then you'll know that I am always banging on about how important it is to keep busy in order to stick to your fat loss calories more easily. And this very much applies to the post-diet transition as well, until your diet fatigue and food focus and hunger and cravings are under control. Yet another reason is that based on research, movement is one of the main habits that successful weight loss maintainers cite when researchers ask them what's helping them keep the weight off. And I'm referring in particular to the National Weight Control Registry, which is a list of people who have lost 10% of their body weight at least and maintained it for at least a year. Last but not least, maintaining the highest degree of physical activity that's realistic for you is going to help you live a higher energy flux lifestyle, which in very simple terms means eating more calories and moving more to maintain fat loss, as opposed to eating fewer calories and moving less to maintain that fat loss. In both cases, you're achieving calorie maintenance, but in one case, you're moving more, higher energy flux, and in one case, you're moving less, lower energy flux. I'm going to cover this in way more depth with Coach Brandon Da Cruz in next week's episode, so I'm going to leave it here. But what I want to say about this higher energy flux lifestyle is that, interestingly, studies suggest that a high energy flux approach seems to be a more effective way to enjoy and maintain a healthy body composition for the long haul compared to a lower energy flux lifestyle. Having said that, some people do far more physical activity for the sake of fat loss than they are able to maintain when their diet is over. So if that's you, and you want to reduce physical activity immediately after the diet is over and you're entering this post-diet transition, be more conservative when you're estimating your maintenance calories. I'm gonna give you some heuristics to help you calculate how many calories walking and cardio can correspond to. As a rule of thumb, 2000 steps per day equal around 80 to 120 calories as a range. If we're taking a person of average size, I would say 100 calories. So if you go from 15,000 steps a day to 13,000 and you estimated your maintenance calories to be around 2000 calories based on 15,000 steps, now you may want to play it safe and increase calories only to 1900, taking into account that you're going to lose 100 calories a day in terms of energy expenditure from reducing your steps by 2000. Then, what's important is that any estimation you make is an estimation. So you're going to have to revisit it and reassess it as you collect more data on how your body is responding to this increase. And if you haven't listened to my podcast episode that I recorded way back in the day about how to interpret scale weight changes in any nutritional phase, you're going to want to do that after you listen to this episode. I also want to pause to discuss what an average person actually is, because it can be confusing for you if I say, well, the average person burns around 100 calories when walking. Now, when I'm discussing average people, I'm referring to someone whose maintenance calories is around 2000 if they're AFAB or 2500 if they are AMAB. So if you are AFAB, but you're on the smaller side and you're less active, and your estimated maintenance calories are below 2000, I would estimate that your steps would burn about 80 calories, not 100, every time you do 2000 of them. Whereas if you're AMAB, you're more active, you're a bigger person, and your estimated maintenance is 2800 calories, so above 2500, I would estimate your steps to burn around 120 calories every time you do 2000 of them. Whereas if your estimated maintenance is exactly 2000 or 2500 or just around that number, and you're AFAB or AMAB respectively, then stick with 100 calories as the value in between 80 and 120. With respect to the calorie expenditure from cardio, I can't give you similar guidelines because cardio energy expenditure varies wildly depending on the activity that you are doing, but also how big you are and how much body fat you carry relative to your muscle mass. But I am going to give you a really helpful resource to estimate that calorie expenditure that's available for free online. I'm going to link to it in the show notes, and it's a web page from the Macro Factor app website where they ask you a few questions on your size, your body fat percentage, the specific activity, how long you're doing it for, and other factors. And I work out the website works out a really reasonable estimate based on a formula that is evidence based. So that can be helpful for you to get an idea of how many calories you're currently burning doing, let's say, 60 minutes of cycling per week, and how many calories, therefore, you might no longer be burning if you go down to 30 minutes. There's a final and important caveat I want to bring up. It's much more challenging to estimate your caloric expenditure from any activity than it is to estimate the calories that we consume from food and drinks. It's yet another reason why I typically like to keep physical activity consistent straight after a fat loss phase, and I tend to manipulate the caloric intake side of the equation more readily. If you are going to reduce activity, you have to take into account that at the end of a fat loss diet, you have incurred what's called metabolic adaptation. So you're no longer burning as many calories from the activity that you are doing as you did before you underwent the fat loss phase. And there's also a phenomenon known as energy compensation, whereby, based on averages found in research, humans seem to burn around 70% of the total energy expenditure that's estimated from any physical activity. In other words, if using some fitness formula, you estimate that you burn 100 calories doing a certain amount of activity, it seems like people tend to compensate for at least some of this energy expenditure, and on average, it looks like they might compensate by about 30%. So they will burn 70 calories instead of 100. And some people will have a higher degree of compensation, even above 30%, and some people have a lower degree of compensation, below 30%. So what I'm saying is that if you took any random resource that helps you estimate how many calories you burn from some kind of physical activity that's available on the internet, the number of calories that that resource will work out will not be accurate, and it will likely be overestimated because most of these resources do not take into account metabolic adaptation and energy compensation. When you get an estimation of the caloric expenditure, I would take it with a grain of salt. And so, for example, if you work out that the amount of cardio you're doing now burns 700 calories a week, so 100 calories per day for ease of calculation, rather than assuming that it's necessarily going to mean that if you reduce that amount, if you halve it, now you're only going to burn 50 calories, you're probably going to burn less than those 50 calories. Again, I can't give you a precise amount, but this is to help you understand that it's not as simple as if you're removing that cardio altogether, all you need to do is reduce your estimated maintenance by 100 calories and you will have squared the two. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and you might want to err on the side of being more conservative with your maintenance calories. And in fairness, being conservative with the initial calorie maintenance estimation is an approach that I typically take, especially with clients who tend to be a little bit afraid of weight regain after dieting and who've never dieted successfully before. And also knowing that at the end of the day, it is an estimation, I would rather err on the side of starting on slightly lower calories. And if and when I see that the biofeedback suggests that their maintenance calories haven't been quite reached, then who doesn't like to get more food from their coach? I certainly love it. So I tend to start with a certain estimation. I then tend to assign a calorie target that's around 10% below the estimate, and then I adjust based on the biofeedback in subsequent weeks. Now, moving into step number 5, find a coach who's going to keep working with you because you deserve way better than one of those coaches who's going to sign you up for their 12-week dieting plan and then they're going to leave you at the metaphorical altar, aka the end of the diet, which again is the phase when you need them the most. If you only want to work with a coach for as long as it takes to lose body fat, fair enough. But I would recommend that you at least stick with them for 1 to 3 months after you're done with the deficit for good, so that they can support you through this post diet transition and set you up for the rest of your life after fat loss so that you can maintain those fat loss results long term. I personally tell a client upfront if they have a starting goal of fat loss that one, it's going to take time, not just 8 to 12 weeks, at least for the vast majority of people who have a significant amount of weight to lose. That's not going to cut it. But two, that some of that time will also be devoted to learning how to maintain that fat loss. So, of course, things happen, and I don't lock anyone into a contract and tell them you're going to have to pay me for 12 months straight. I just make them aware. And if they have to stop coaching for other reasons, that's unfortunate, but life does happen. However, at least they know in advance that I'm not going to abandon them and I don't expect them to know how to maintain their results post diet. To wrap up this episode, I want to talk you through a client case study of mine to show to you that this process works. And I'm going to use my client Corey as an example. Back in May, he wrapped up the last 12 weeks of a fat loss phase that took him from peak bulking size to the leanest and most muscular that he's ever been. And that's a record that we're soon going to be breaking again, by the way, so watch this space. And those 12 weeks, admittedly, were really, really challenging for Corey. They were 12 weeks that came after 8 months of working towards fat loss. We spent quite a few months at calorie maintenance. We were taking a deficit break, so we weren't always in a deficit. But the goal for the entire 11 months was to lose body fat. So, from a psychological standpoint, he was always geared towards this fat loss goal, which can bring about some diet fatigue even when you are at maintenance calories. So, this was a challenging phase for Corey, probably the most challenging dieting phase that he's ever been through. And there were various reasons for that. For one, the fat loss phase took a long time because throughout that period, he also changed job, he went on several trips, he moved house, and there were some things coming up in his family life that he had to take care of. In addition to that, there were some physical health aspects that came up for him that he never had to deal with before. So all in all, physiological, psychologically, and practically, this dieting phase was not easy, which is why I was really careful to help him navigate the transition out of a deficit. And we used the exact same strategy that I've just shared with you in this podcast. And I'm going to quote verbatim or word for word his feedback from his check-in 2 weeks into this post-diet transition. He usually sends me audio messages for his check-ins, so I took the time to write down word for word what he said because it was a really powerful piece of feedback. Corey said, I'm still kinda keeping things fairly similar to what I was eating before, meaning during the fat loss phase, and then just slowly integrating different foods back into my diet. But slow and steady, as opposed to, right, cuts over, let's eat all these things that I wasn't able to eat before. Because, I didn't have enough calories essentially, which is, to be honest, the pattern I've fallen into in the past without even realizing it. It was very much like cut and run. My approach this time feels a lot healthier and a lot more considerate of both my body and also my mental transition back to maintenance. So this is how Corey felt, and after 2 weeks since the end of his diet, he was going out for at least one date night every week. He was eating chips and vegan pie, and he was generally rocking life after fat loss without worrying about losing all of his progress. So I told you how he felt. I told you what he's been doing to prove to you that he wasn't just treating this transition as a continuation of the deficit and depriving himself of all foods. And now I'm gonna tell you how his physique changed. And if you check through my Instagram account and you go back to the posts that I was making in May, you're going to be able to see this visually. But not only did he maintain the amount of fat that he lost very effectively, he also ended up looking a little bit leaner because when your carbohydrates are stored as glycogen in your muscles along with water, they're going to make your muscles look fuller. It's one reason why when you don't train for a while, people worry about losing muscle in the initial 2 weeks when realistically you're not losing that much muscle. But they worry because they look in the mirror and they see that their muscles have seemingly deflated. And they have deflated because there isn't as much water and as much glycogen in them. Similarly, after a diet, your muscles fill up with glycogen and water, and all of a sudden you look similarly lean, but you look like your muscles have more of a pop, which is one of the benefits of this post-diet transition in terms of the changes that you may see in the mirror if you navigate a transition the right way, and also if you are lean enough, because if you are at a phase within your body composition development journey where you've lost a bunch of fat but you still have a ways to go, then the bigger the amount of fat that covers your muscle, the less likely you are to see muscle definition and to see that your muscles fill up with glycogen and water. So this will depend on the leanness that you achieve as well. In any case, with this client case study, I wanted to show you what's possible, how it's possible to feel, how it's possible to live your life, and what kind of physique changes you can see when you follow this step-by-step guide. And that is a wrap for today's episode. As always, thank you so much for giving me some of your time. If you want to work with me, just like Corey and just like all of my other clients who I'm helping with their own physicals, then I'm looking for new online clients. And if you want to read more about the service and the price, then you find a link to my website in the show notes. And if you're ready to apply, you're going to find a link to my application form in the show notes or also on the website that's as well linked in the show notes. Basically, everything is in the show notes. Alternatively, just reach out to me via Instagram DM at Nikias_fit to transform or email me at fit to transform podcast@gmail.com. And if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, then please leave a 5-star rating. And if you're using a platform where you can leave written reviews, I would love to read your written review. And as soon as I find out that I get one, which sometimes happens with a slight delay because I don't really get notified unless I go digging for this information for some reason, but as soon as I'm aware of it, rest assured that I reply to every single comment and review, and I appreciate them very much. On that note, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you very soon. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and